All right, the recording is started, and this is the February 18th, 2020 Crossplane community meeting. So the first thing to talk about on the agenda today is that 0.8 was released just yesterday, so that is very fresh news. Thank you to Dan Mangum, for running the release process yesterday. So we successfully got new versions of the Crossplane runtime, core Crossplane, which is version 0.8, and the GCP, Azure, and AWS stacks were all released as well. The Rook stack was not released since there was no functionality that had been included since the last monthly release. So that one did not get published yesterday consciously, that is. And so thank you, Dan, for taking care of that yesterday. Along with that thank you and that gratitude comes a awareness of some of the headaches along in the release process right now. So we invested in a lot of automation to do the tagging and publishing and all sorts of elements of the release process to get artifacts out there and available. But there are still some manual parts of the process, as well as divergence from the published process that has not been documented yet. So those need to be followed up on to at least get our process guide updated with what the current steps are. And this last item here is kind of an awareness that we should start thinking about how can we streamline the process further, because there's whole synchronization and sequencing that needs to be done in the release. And we've captured it kind of right here. This is sort of the synchronization steps that sort of augment the existing published release guide here. So we're not going to get into like a full technical discussion of these right now, but essentially the issue is that we want to publish both Crossplane runtime and core Crossplane with a new semantic version. And then we want to pin the dependencies of all the stacks and other downstream repos to those release versions. So you need to get the tagging done, and then update dependencies, and then update the reference docs and examples references, and then go back to the core repo and then update things. And so it's kind of a synchronization mess there. That would be really nice if there was a better story for that. So one of the things that could help is if we split out the docs from the core Crossplane repo and put those into their own stack repos so that they are versioned and residents of the source code that they belong to. That's one thing. So we should continue thinking about ways to improve this, because to run a release now, it's not a lot of work, but it does have way more manual things than we would want, considering the investment in automation that we have. So it ends up taking like at least a few hours to run a release. So from that awareness goes back to a gratitude to Dan to running the release and spending a few hours on that yesterday. So thank you, Dan. And any thoughts you have on the release process, since you've done it a couple times yourself, will probably be pretty valuable. So with 0.8 out the door, it's time again to update the roadmap with our plans for 0.9. With our regular recurring monthly release process, we will have one more release with 0.9 before KubeCon Amsterdam. So Phil, would you be able to follow up on updating the roadmap here with the 0.9 entry as well?
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you so much, Phil. Appreciate it. So pass it. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Okay, cool. Any other thoughts or items to share on 0.8 or the upcoming 0.9 release 1 month from now? All right, we can move on to the community topics section here. So we want to talk about our favorite Crossplane live stream show by our very own Dan Mangum. We had an episode just last week, TBS 10. Dan, do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. So we had Ramiro, who's the CEO of Octeto, CEO and founder of Octeto, on the show. And Octeto is basically a tool to do local Kubernetes development. So essentially what it is it just syncs your local files into a pod running on Kubernetes. And we showed how that kind of enhances the developer workflow and how you can use that alongside Crossplane to consume managed services. And it does some things like allowing you to inject different secrets and credentials when you're in development versus when deployment is actually made in production. So you can imagine kind of using a development database or something like that and injecting those credentials and then going to prod and using different ones. So we walked through a number of scenarios there. It's a really cool tool. It's all open source. So we appreciate that as well. As linked here, there's a guide to be able to kind of like follow along, and it's a pretty easy setup. So I definitely recommend that. One thing that came up actually from the comments on the YouTube channel from one of the viewers that we kind of got into a little bit during the show, and Ramiro expanded on some, is that using Octeto to actually develop controllers is pretty useful. So that's kind of like a side thing that wasn't really a focus of the show, but in terms of doing local development on Crossplane itself, it can be useful because you can imagine if you just kind of can, stop and start a controller really easily, actually in the Kubernetes cluster that you're running it in, instead of running it out of cluster. That's kind of a cool feature set there. So if you want to get any insight on that, then definitely look into that, and maybe it'll help you get started contributing as well.
Right on, Dan. Do you happen to have an idea of TBS 11 already, or soliciting ideas for that one still?
Yeah, so this will kind of be the I guess the early announcement. We're still nailing down the details, but next week, actually just got confirmation this morning, we will be joining up with one of the maintainers of Cluster API, so the Kubernetes SIG, that's working on basically kind of a similar thing to Crossplane. It's very compatible in that they're basically creating CRDs to create more granular components of a Kubernetes cluster. So you actually kind of like bootstrap your own nodes and that sort of thing. So instead of provisioning an EKS cluster, AKS, GKE, et cetera, you're actually spinning up something like EC2 instances and then using kubeadmin or some other provider to run Kubernetes on there. And because of our very extendable manner of provisioning to Kubernetes clusters, then you can imagine you can get the credentials from that, point a Kubernetes target at it, and then we can immediately start deploying resources into that from the Crossplane control cluster. So should be a pretty cool show. I still have quite a bit of prep to do for it to get it ready, but pretty excited about it, and I think it'll be another good one.
Right on, Dan. And that'd be interesting if there's any outcome from that show of potential integration of Cluster API with Crossplane, or building on that proof of concept, or the collaboration that you all will be doing there. So that's always exciting to have new things and new ideas come up with the topics of the shows that you run. So sweet. Definitely my favorite live stream show thing. Whatever you kids say. All right. So a quick note on OAM, on Open Application Model Support in Crossplane. So Nick has been driving this effort with the rest of the maintainers and Open Application Model community. So Nick's proposal to update the spec for OAM to be a little bit more Kubernetes friendly and centric, and to also have Crossplane be one of the first runtimes to support the full functionality of OAM is going very well. There has been great feedback and general collaboration and agreement with some of the OAM maintainers. So this is captured actually now in this pull request. So if you want to follow along upstream with the OAM spec pull request number 304, then you can see all the discussion there. So great work, Nick, on continuing to drive that. So template stacks are in and were included in the 0.8 release yesterday. So that's super exciting. There's some great work by Daniel Susskind and Muvafik and Marcus as well. I think Muvafik, you added this item to the agenda. So I guess, do you want to go ahead and speak to it since you added this item to the agenda?
Yeah, sure. So template stacks, as Daniel started there for them, has been leading it. It basically allows you to have a customized directory and like make Crossplane make Crossplane deploy a generic controller for it to reconcile. And the first example for this is stack minimal GCP with networking resources like connection, global address, and all that stuff, as well as resource classes with minimal hardware requirements that you can just spin up and see. And the second engine that is included in template stacks is Helm tree. And the example for that is like sample stack WordPress. It's basically a Helm chart, but like you get a controller, like generic controller, that watches continuously and applies them resources. And like both of these are like integrated. So when you deploy both of them, you get a WordPress deployed into a Kubernetes cluster with fully secure connectivity resources. And we will be planning to update the minimal AWS and Azure too with customized engine stuff.
Right on, awesome. Yeah, I love how the focus or the goal of template stacks is to reduce the effort it takes to create a stack for Crossplane and add new functionality to the Crossplane's control plane without having to write any code. And I also really like that there's like a customized approach, and Helm is also supported right now as well. So that's awesome. Great work, Susskind and Muvafik and Marcus on all that effort there. Really glad to see that those get updated and included in 0.8.
Yeah, super exciting. One other note about the 0.8 template stacks. There are some slight differences between the 0.7 template stacks. Mostly the data model is slightly simplified. The controllers are a little bit different now, and template stacks are enabled by default in Crossplane, and you can specify that in the Helm chart. And if you need to disable them, you can do that too.
Right on. Thank you, Susskind. Okay, were there any other community topics that folks wanted to bring up before we move on to pull requests to discuss? All right, let's go ahead and move on then to, so we had in the pull request section here, when I took a pass through open pull requests, I didn't, we've got a big push to get a lot in for the 0.8 release, so I didn't see any outstanding PRs that were, needed a discussion right now or needed any real shepherding to move them along. But Dan Mangum, I think you added this good first issues section here. Do you want to talk through some of those issues here for potential new contributors to the community?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've gotten a number of people who have dropped into Slack and said they'd like to get started contributing. And we've been kind of like mentioning these issues ad hoc in the dev channel and that sort of thing. So I just wanted to bring them together for a place that people could kind of see them lined up across all the different repos. So we're trying to be more diligent about tagging issues as good first issue. So all of these have been. And so they kind of range in complexity. So like this one we have open here is basically just kind of like a refactor of some tests that we have. So probably something that's not that exciting, but if you're just looking to kind of like get your feet wet and, make a contribution and kind of see how the pull request flow works and that sort of thing, something more straightforward like that may be useful. And then they kind of range in complexity all the way up to Crossplane CLI ones that are migrating bash scripts to Go and that sort of thing. So one nice thing about the Crossplane CLI is that could be, highly impactful to lots of users of Crossplane, and especially that migration to Go. Then you could probably, have like a pretty big ownership in that. So if anyone is looking to have a larger kind of presence in contributing, that would be great. And then there's also things like that are more short-term and needed, like the stack install fail that you just had open there, and the cross-docs functionality. Once again, kind of something that's more immediate term. So if anyone takes a look at these and has questions, or they're like, none of these interest me, I'd like to work on something else, we can definitely find something for you. So please feel free to drop a message in Slack, and we'll follow up, and happy to do any kind of like onboarding or walkthrough to get you started as well.
Pretty big ownership. Go
Oh, Suskin.
Cool. So yeah, and then in general, the more like issues that we can have tagged, like the more consistent we are with that good first issue tag across all the repos, the better off it will be for people to be self-help themselves. When they come to, because that's a common issue that a lot of projects use. When people come to the project and go ahead and look for that good first issue tag on label on issues, then they're more likely to find something that might speak to them and be able to contribute more easily, just lowering the barrier for entry there. So that's always good to, if you see an issue that you think might be, you're not going to get to right away, but might be good for someone who's new to the project and doesn't have like a too steep of a learning curve, then go ahead and tag it with this good first issue label here. All right, cool. Thanks for adding those, Dan. And so that is all the agenda items that we had here today on the published agenda. We went through those pretty quickly. Is there any other topic that anybody wants to bring up right now?
I think we could talk, if people are interested, a little bit about the release process and some of those headaches you mentioned. If we wanted to get into that, I'd definitely be open to talking about it. Also, if that doesn't seem critical for this time, then that's fine as well.
Yeah, it's not critical, but we do have optional time for deeper technical discussions at the end here that folks can drop off the call if they're not interested in the release process, and we could have a chat about that as well for sure. Are there any other agenda folks for generally applicable agenda topics folks want to bring up? All right, cool. So then we can adjourn and close the general session here for the community meeting. And anyone who is interested in the release process and builds and all that sort of stuff is more than welcome to stay on. But if you're not, then this will very likely and very quickly be a boring discussion for you. So feel free to drop off at any time. Yep, good. I knew somebody would drop off. I'm about to pick immediately. Like, bye-bye.
Well,
right on.
Is like what, probably like 8 o'clock at night for him, or?
Yeah. Right on. All right, cool. So let's bring up I think something that will help kind of drive this discussion here is like these changes that we have, these manual steps here, and the synchronization effort that we have that we need to do right now. So I mean, the first step obviously is like, even if we don't fix this with automation, is getting it updated into the release guide, because right now it's kind of it's way too much, because we did a whole release process guide here, and so that anybody could run a release according to these steps. They're highly detailed, they've got all the commands and stuff. But now, since we have kind of a new approach here that has not been documented, we're in a state where only 1 or 2 people like have that tribal knowledge to run it correctly now, which is definitely a bad state to be in. So at the very least, we need to update our process guides such that we can get back to a state where anyone can run a release again. But yeah, so Dan, did you have some ideas you wanted to go ahead and start spitting out about how we update dependencies, like for the Crossplane runtime and Crossplane and all the stacks depending on those, and how we update like documentation and user guides and all that flow there?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, the first thing that's kind of like the clear, I think most tedious part is updating references and docs. So that both involves regenerating the API docs before we cut the branch, which is the first step there. And then also doing the branch prep, which is like 6th or there or something. So basically going through and updating, pointing to specific versions of different stacks and Crossplane and that sort of thing. And I think those are probably, like, the API docs are regenerated, but as you'll see, I have a PR open this morning because I regenerated the API docs and then didn't update the table to link to one of them. So there's just all kinds of like small things like that. So part of that is getting cross docs either into the Crossplane CLI or into Crossplane tools. So I have that issue open for getting into Crossplane CLI. Maybe Crossplane tools make more sense as a generation kind of thing, so we could take a look at that. But that leads to the next part of moving those docs to the actual stack repos, which I think makes a lot more sense. However, that brings up the question of how those basically get published to the GitHub repo that has the website on it. So there's like a automatic sync that happens right now for the docs in the main Crossplane repo. So we could set up something like that. Another idea I had is if we had kind of just like a CRD's doc kind of thing, or a Crossplane CRD's doc website that essentially just parsed them for you. And that way we wouldn't be, as we have more infrastructure stacks and that sort of thing, then it wouldn't be that each, repo had to be running its own doc generation and making sure they're up to date and then getting implemented, the build submodule to sync that and that sort of thing. It would be more like sort of like Go docs, if you're familiar. And because we could basically dynamically parse the CRDs and that sort of thing and generate them on the fly, that could also be a nice dog fooding application. And last thing on that, I'm also aware that that's not just like a trivial amount of work there. So I know we have a lot on our plate right now, but that'd be something that I think would be really cool and would also allow for us to scale with more stacks being implemented and quicker changes and that sort of thing.
I have a question about that. Are the docs that we update primarily the CRD docs, or do we update like links to specific versions of the projects too?
Yeah, so we do both. The first bullet point in the update process there is actually updating the API docs. Yeah, if you go to crossplane.io and then go to documentation and then API reference, that's what we're doing the generation with crossdocs for. So that's just like, we have to run that regularly. One of the issues with that is that, let's say something gets updated in stack GCP, the next step to get that into the docs is doing an update on the Crossplane docs, which isn't really a straightforward workflow and is definitely very manual. And then, like you said, the other part is what Jared has up here, where we're basically changing like master to different versions. And that's more related to walkthroughs and examples and stuff, which is a little more tricky, and I'm a little more comfortable updating manually, I think.
Yeah, well, then I was just thinking about that one there. So if you had all the examples as well as the user guides in residing in each one of the stack repos, then it seems like it would, a logical step there could be that each one of these here could be like a placeholder. And then during the build process, the value of the current version that's being built could be injected into those files there. So when you're building from like the, stack GCP 0.6 release branch, then, as a build environment variable or whatever, it could flow in there and, populate the docs with that particular version and have them published, with whatever the version is that's currently being built. So it would be a completely, automated process that way. It's kind of difficult right now. Sort of difficult right now because all the stacks, docs and stuff live within the single Crossplane repo. So, and they all are independently versioned as well. So core Crossplane doesn't have internal knowledge or innate knowledge about what version each stack is, versus if you're building the docs for each stack out of the stack repos, they do have an innate knowledge of what version they are, because that is the, or, you know, versioned artifacts that are being built at that time from that repo. So that's one idea.
Mm-hmm.
Question about that. Do we care about the documents in the repo being, like, having actual values if someone's reading them, for example?
I think that's less important. Definitely, like, it would be, it depends on what kind of docs. If it's like actually the examples, so examples get updated as well, on the release branch. So like those, I feel more like we'd like to have those have the right like version, that sort of thing. But I mean, most people who come to the repo are like, so on master, you know, we could have master there. And then I guess on any branch that's not master, like we could build this conditional logic basically into the generation, then like replace master essentially. So I think it would be more important on master. I don't think that many people are going to like the release 0.6 branch and like, let me look at the docs on that, but could be wrong there.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Suskin, and one that I entirely overlooked when I was sharing that idea, is that, yeah, like, you know, there's kind of two forms of the docs. One is the markdown that's committed to the source code repository itself. And one is the parsed, published, you know, generated HTML docs that go onto crossplane.io document site. So yeah, so having like a placeholder version that's in the committed source code repo would make for a broken experience if you're browsing the docs from within the source code. So that's, I didn't think of that. That's good that you bring that up.
It's still a good idea, it just makes it trickier. Like, for example, maybe we would have to generate both versions of the docs.
Yeah, so we could do something, I'm sure, there, but that's a good point to bring up. That's one aspect, the docs and examples having their versions updated, which is a manual tedious process right now. But is there, you know, I with Go mod and dependency management within Go, is there a better solution, or is there automation that can improve the experience we have around like these items here, like pinning Crossplane to the new Crossplane runtime release, or pinning the stacks to the new Crossplane runtime, pinning the stacks to the new Crossplane? Like, that is that always going to be manual, or do you have to update the go.mod with a, you know, text editor and then run go mod tidy or whatever? Like, or is there a better process there?
So I think that, I mean, we generally are going to have to actually like do the pinning and go mod, but we could, you know, generalize that with a script or something like that, or maybe something more sophisticated. But I don't think that you can like have some like conditional logic where go mod is going to like automatically update itself or anything like that.
That sounds dangerous anyways by itself.
Yeah, and like,
dangerous.
And it's not clear, you know, what kind of like where you want to pin it to. So just because we're like releasing a new version of Stack GCP, it's not clear that we want the latest tag on Crossplane runtime. I mean, like generally we do, but not, I mean, that wouldn't be something that I would want like hard coded, like always use the most recent. It could be the default or something. But.
Well, the type of interface that I would be looking for is, well, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the node dependency management stuff, but being able to say like, add a dependency for, like, with a command line tool, say save this dependency, this exact version, so that it can be more easily automated than if you're editing the file directly.
Oh, I never edit the file. I mean, you
Okay.
just use go mod and then, or go get, and you just do, like, for instance, for all of these yesterday, I ran the exact same commands, go get github.com/crossplane.io/crossplane at latest. So I just ran that on all of them. And you can also run it at, you know, v0.7.0. So it's similar to like node like that, but you still have that manual step.
Okay, but that manual step could be in a script somewhere.
Right.
Yeah, it did. So you could do a go get Crossplane at v0.8.0, like specify a tag.
Yeah, you can specify a tag or a branch or a commit.
Man, here I am being a sucker and doing that, like putting that version into the go.mod. is what
Yeah,
I've been doing.
that's probably why this didn't stick out to me as much as like as something that needed to be automated, because that was probably the easiest part of the release flow yesterday.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, the general problem here still remains about like the scalability of all these, because like one of the pains here is having to open pull requests and waiting for CI to pass and then approving and merging the pull requests. So that general process of the more stacks. I mean, and that gets into a conversation about what stacks do we as a upstream community want to maintain and be responsible for, or does that get completely independently managed by different teams and vendors, et cetera, so that burden is more of a dissemination scalability as opposed to trying to scale a single person or individual's responsibilities to across all those stacks.
Yeah. One thing I thought of, so like you were mentioning, I was running the release yesterday, but I don't have like permissions to cut a branch or RC tag or that sort of thing, which is like fine because we obviously need like, it's not like we're just going to give someone like permissions to cut all, like do all the PRs without review. So like, even if Jared was running it, like he'd still have to get a sign off on the review. Yep. The cutting and the RC tags are different in that regard. But like one thing I thought of is if we had kind of like a third party committing those kind of changes, like the RC tag and cutting a new branch. So by third party, I mean like a bot or some sort of automated process. Then we could do kind of like scoped permissions to whoever is running the release. So like you could say, all right, Marcus is running the release today. Give him permissions to like execute this thing that tells the bot to cut a new release branch. I've seen that pretty commonly across different projects, especially really large ones where lots of different people may run the release and they only want to give people like temporary permissions and they don't want to, update the GitHub permissions to do that. So they have a bot that has the permissions and then they give them permission to invoke the bot sort of.
Yeah. And so actually, that's the intent of the goal is that tagging and cutting release branches and stuff that actually should be part of our build automation pipelines, and they were until we started doing an RC tag. So the RC tag there is like we have we run the build tag pipeline already to do like a 0.8 tag, and so that's completely automated, and you had permissions to run that because the entity that is performing the tag and pushing the tag is actually the build bot. Right. And you have permissions as an operator of Jenkins to execute that pipeline, and then it does the Git operations using its credentials. So that's where we should be back to again soon. If somebody were to follow up on that, I'm not going to name any names, but I might point fingers. Is that that tag pipeline would work for doing the RC tags as well. And so when it's time to tag master with an RC tag, you just run that pipeline. And so you wouldn't need credentials or permissions to push tags directly to master, which is not a good practice in the first place anyways. So that should be adjusted. And then if you look also at the tagging pipeline, it has the ability to cut a release branch as well. It just doesn't work in our current flow where we want to do release branches after tagging. So like that could be cleaned up as well so that nobody would need tag permissions necessarily to pushing of tags manually or creating release branches manually either. So that could be completely offloaded to our build automation. So there should be a solution for that.
Can the current tag jobs create an arbitrary tag?
No, that's the problem, Daniel, is, and I think I have a pull request open for that I just haven't followed up on, is like, because it's got a regular expression that's like, oh, if this tag here you're putting here is not conformant to, my perspective, my opinion of what a SimVer should look like. So that's the issue that needs to be fixed.
Okay.
And you actually were helping me like a couple months ago with like getting that regex to work within Make.
That's what that
cross-platform too. Yeah, and like it still isn't a good solution. Like I still haven't been able to figure out something that works for the scenarios that I actually want to support. So that's still kind of a bit of a mess.
If we need to make a new regex, I can help with that if you're working on that.
Regex. Cool. So those are some of the ideas there. So from this conversation, it sounds like, the permissions aspect for tagging and push and creating release branches, we can do that through build automation. We should be able to do that. So that should be easier. The dependency management could be addressed maybe with a little bit of tooling with, go get and, go mod and stuff like that. We could probably add some automation to make that easier. The scalability of having to do PRs across multiple stacks. I don't think as an upstream community that we want to continue, maintaining too many more stacks. So I don't think we're going to continue to scale there. That should be like an independent thing that particular vendors or, authors own and could do on their own with their own permissions and such. And then the docs, thinking through that and moving to a approach or design where each repo owns its own docs, and maybe can have automation there to update the versions there and remove that process too could be a thing there. So there's a few ideas there across all those different dimensions. Were there any others that I didn't just mention right now that I forgot in the summary there?
So I agree that we don't want to, we're probably not going to be like maintaining all of these stacks and that sort of thing. But if we did have like a dynamic generation thing where someone could just have like essentially a config file in their repo that pointed to their CRDs and like had maybe some other options or that sort of thing, that would obviously allow like people just to get documentation out of the box on all of their types, which would probably be pretty valuable. So, but like I said, that would take like a little bit of work in like building something that parses them and like dynamically presents them. And then we'd have to, run it and that sort of thing. Could be a cool dog food thing, but how do we feel about that versus just being like, if you're building a stack, like you document it however you want. And
that kind of gets into the whole conversation about like what the scaffolding, right? Like when you do a Crossplane CLI, like in stack init, what do you get? You get like some build automation, you get some structure, documentation generation stuff. Like it's highly reasonable to be part of the scaffolding that you get as well. I'm sure Suskin has some good opinions on that.
Yeah, I agree with that. It would be great to have that. And I also really liked your idea, Dan, of having an equivalent of godoc.org, but for stacks or CRDs. Because having a shared place where you don't have to worry about publishing your own docs is going to be really nice for stack authors.
Cool.
Stackdoc.io. Patent pending.
Stack docs. Yep.
Cool. Yeah. So a number of ideas there.
I had another idea too that I didn't mention yet.
More ideas. Hit me.
So do we need to release all of the stacks all at once at the same time as the Crossplane stuff? That's my idea.
Yeah, no, that's not a requirement.
Cool.
In terms of the process, but I do like having them on a regular cadence as well. And in terms of amortizing release costs, doing it all in one sweep at the same time makes a lot of sense to me and has been the easiest thing to do.
Yeah, I was just thinking that if they have pinned versions anyway of Crossplane, for example, if they're using it, then releasing them slightly later could make the Crossplane release a little less hectic by splitting it up a little bit.
To me, like when I think about that, then I think about having to come back later and then go through another release exercise again to run those. So just like it's like batching to me feels like it works well so far, at least. So we only have to do one of them a month, and then we can not worry about it for another unless we have to do a patch or something.
Yeah, the main blocker on that is just that because the Crossplane docs are dependent on the stack. So like Jared's saying, like you release a new version of Stack GCP, you have to go and update the docs on Crossplane and then backport that to the release branch and that sort of thing. So it's just do it all in one.
So that's
batching. Yeah, it's kind of a pain, but it also is kind of nice to batch everything together.
That's that Crossplane depends on the stacks, not that the stacks depend on Crossplane.
Oh, they both do. It's circular. Just like any good dependency, circular. Yeah, so there's more things to straighten out.
Though. So
What'd you say, Dan?
I said one way is only the docs. It's not. We don't have an actual circular dependency.
Yeah, it's not a code. Yeah, it's a circular dependency in other respects, just through documentation. Yeah, it's a soft circular dependency.
Yeah.
Maybe one other idea then, which is the variation of Jared's generation suggestion, is that if both the MDs and the HTML were generated from the same thing, then it might make managing placeholders a little bit easier.
Oh yeah, I see what you're saying. So you have like one, template essentially, and then as an output to the automation process is the final MD and final HTML.
Yeah, something which resembles that. Yeah.
Yep, I see what you're saying. Cool. Any other ideas on build automation and improvements that we want to share right now? All right, then we can go ahead and adjourn the entire meeting. And this was a good usage of our optional time today for deeper technical discussions. And thanks everybody for joining this week.
Cool.
All right, have a good week, everybody. See ya.
All right, thanks, Jared.